That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide, a twice-a-week show in which yours truly, Brian Hyde, takes just a few minutes to debunk and counterspin some of the predominant narrative and propaganda that's being beamed at us via corporate media, particularly here in the great state of Idaho. It's a lot of fun to do this, and I hope it doesn't come off as too mean-spirited. I'm trying to have some fun, but at the same time, I don't like being deceived, and I suspect you probably don't either. So it's necessary, sadly necessary, that we have to do this kind of thing. And for those of you who are spreading the word, it's very gratifying to see our numbers starting to grow. For those of you who disagree, by the way, I appreciate what you do when you warn people, don't ever watch that. That guy is totally dangerous and off his rocker. Please, you need to tell more people so they can see for themselves, which I'm quite confident they will. Our theme today is the Rainbow Connection. And I know that could go a couple of different ways, right? Of course, so when I think of the Rainbow Connection, I usually tend to think of this guy first and foremost. Yeah, the one who sang about it. But sadly, the Rainbow Connection today will not be referring to a lovely song sung by Kermit the Frog at the beginning of the Muppet movie. Instead, it's going to refer to the never-ending story, or at least it seems never-ending. What? Another Pride Festival? Yes, Boise wrapped up 34 years of celebrating acceptance and community. That's kind of what they're celebrating. Of course, there's no acceptance if you're not towing the line and you're not part of the community, if you're not absolutely marching in lockstep and chanting in unison. How do we know this? Well, because this tweet was shared over the weekend as well. Here's the Rainbow Connection. It's kind of hard to read, but Ryan Spoon tweeted this, flying over the Filth Fest, a.k.a. Pride Fest in downtown Boise. This was on, I believe it was Saturday, the 9th. It's a banner being towed by an airplane, and it says, "Rainbow is God's, not yours." So apparently there was some pretty serious heartburn over this. I mean, look, corporate America, virtually every institution governmentally is on board with rainbow festivals and the LGBT pride. I mean, it's not like, oh my gosh, this poor picked on minority. You have the support of virtually every major institution in the country, but there's a victimhood that must be claimed and used to obtain power over others. And trust me, it was definitely seized upon by people who were terribly offended that someone would remind them that the rainbow, at least in many people's understanding, was originally a sign from God following the Great Flood, that he would never again cleanse the earth by that method. So Margaret Carmel, posting on Twitter, said, today Mike Masterson, I guess Mike is running against Mayor McLean in Boise, his campaign returned a $100 donation after a donor, that would be Ryan Spoon, posted anti-pride LGBTQ content on social media. The donation and post was flagged on social media by McLean's campaign manager. Oh, so the mayor has people looking out here. Here's the full statement on Masterson for why he returned the money. Now, some would say this is just, he's just being a good politician. But to me, this seems pretty wishy-washy, and it came off as a pretty big virtue signal. Masterson said, last night I became aware of this issue and immediately returned the contribution. The decision was not open to debate or concern for votes lost or won. I can tolerate differences of opinion, but I can't accept support that violates my personal values. I have spoken out against discrimination throughout my career, wherever and whenever I have found it. And then strangely, he switches to a smaller font here, maybe a softer voice. This campaign is about bringing leadership back to City Hall and putting the voices of our citizens back into government. It's about restoring transparency, collaboration, and openness. That is the only platform on which I will run. Now, again, I would expect this of a politician. This is not the mark of someone who's like, look, it's a dissenting opinion. Get over it. And as far as dissenting opinions go, it's really not even that offensive. It's provocative, yes, but so is waving dildos in kids' faces as people prance around half naked. But you choose your offense, right? And we do choose what things are going to offend us. So to say that, well, I would never support discrimination, that smacks a lot of licking his finger and putting it up. Which way's the wind blowing? Well, it looks to me like it's safest to take this stand, and so that's probably what Masterson is doing. Nevertheless, it has sparked some controversy, and of course, we pick up with the Idaho Statesman, which was more than happy to jump on the bandwagon. Boise mayoral campaign Mike Masterson returns donation after donors anti-gay post. Was it really anti-gay, or was it more just pro-traditional values? Because simply stating, hey, the rainbow is God's, not yours. I mean, you could read something anti-gay into it, but I think anything less than full-throated support is considered anti-gay. At least that's how this seems to play out typically. Well, the Statesman says Boise mayoral candidate Mike Masterson returned $100, a whole $100 on Tuesday to a former local college trustee candidate who made an anti-gay post online. They're going to go with that narrative. It was anti-gay. Not pro-family, not pro-God, no, not traditional values, anti-gay. Talk about binary thinking. Is that allowed, or is this a non-binary world? Anyway, Masterson, who's running against Mayor Lauren McLean in November and is a former police chief, returned the donation to Ryan Spoon. Spoon lost a race to the College of Western Idaho's Board of Trustees in 2022 on a platform to cut public school spending and reduce property taxes, according to previous Idaho Statesman reporting. So they reminded, he's a loser, this guy, or at least he didn't win a particular political race. Nevertheless, the Statesman continues to tell us about how earlier this month Spoon posted a photo of a message he had said was flown over the Boise Pride Festival, which read, "Rainbow is God's, not yours." Flying over the Filth Fest, aka Pride Fest, Spoon said in his post on X, the social media program formerly known as Twitter. Now, Spoon donated $100 to Masterson in July, which McLean's campaign manager, Melanie Folwell, pointed out on X on Sunday. So here we go, the whole guilt by association fallacy. Well, Masterson, are you going to accept this kind of hatred? This is so much contrived outrage, but hey, it's what works for members of the political class. And sadly, Masterson said, well, last night I became aware of this issue and immediately returned the contribution. In his emailed statement to the Statesman, I can tolerate differences of opinion, but I can't accept support that violates my personal values. Wink, wink. That's whatever it takes, whatever I have to say in order to get elected. I'm sorry. Masterson may be a very good and viable alternative to McLean, but this is the kind of wishy-washiness that has become the hallmark of politics. Few politicians have the backbone to say, look, I'm going to stand by this, even though I understand not everybody agrees. I have spoken out against discrimination throughout my career, wherever I have found it. You know, sometimes it's necessary, though, to discriminate between right and wrong. That's not the same thing as hating on people or hating on individuals just because I think you're a part of this group or that group. You know, and in fact, most of the opposition, most of the pushback that you will see against the LGBTQ agenda is not based on some kind of personal animosity towards people themselves. It's based on an evaluation of behavior and the recognition that not all behavior is created equal. Some behavior is affirming. Some behavior, believe it or not, has the potential to create new life. Other behavior, well, it's just kind of an outlet for whatever itch you happen to have at the moment. But they're not the same thing. And when someone distinguishes between right and wrong, appropriate and inappropriate, yes, they're discriminating. But let's not pretend that all discrimination is somehow a terrible thing. How did you choose which car you were going to buy? How did you choose what you were going to eat for breakfast this morning? How did you choose which way you would drive to and from work? You discriminated. You made choices that could have been made for other things. It's a part of life. So can we stop the histrionics about how terrible it is that there's discrimination out there? Especially when there's very open discrimination against anybody who doesn't toe the, LGBTQ party line. Now, Spoon told the Statesman that he would comment only if a statement of at least 300 words he issued would be printed in its entirety. I like this. He's actually kind of beating them at their own game. Yeah, I'll give you a statement, but you have to print it in its entirety, and you have to give me enough space to actually say what I'm trying to say. No word about how the Statesman responded, well, we can't do that. Of course not. Because then it's a lot more difficult to shape the narrative and to manipulate what's being said. Dustin Hurst weighed in, saying, last week, Lauren McLean told us Boise is a welcoming city for all. This week, her campaign bullied her rival into returning a donation of $100 of someone who doesn't buy into the pride/trans agenda. So Boise is welcoming as long as you think right, comrade. He's correct. There's some of that discrimination right there. And of course, right on cue, Here comes the, discrimination is so wrong. Why can't we just treat everybody with love and respect? Oh, well, Sammy, why don't you tell us? Would be great if Spoon's employer, with their very strong DEI policy, would realize he's running around making a mockery of the very thing that AXA, XL, and AXA stand for. Yeah. Let's get him canceled. Let's get him fired. Let's whip up a mob. Because nothing says tolerance like a rainbow-colored mob. Pretty sickening stuff, but there it is. The hypocrisy, I mean, some people will recognize it, some people won't. All right, let's move on. We'll leave the rainbow connection behind for just a moment, but making headlines and raising some eyebrows today, former Idaho Governor Butch Otter endorsed the open primary ballot initiative on Wednesday, becoming the highest profile member of a group of more than 100 Republicans who support the initiative. Now, I think they meant to say cronies, but Republicans, I guess, will work in this case. And yep, Butch Otter definitely was stepping up to support it. Now, that may seem like a ringing endorsement, but you ask people who've been paying attention, and Maria Olson-Nate, for instance, says, remember when Otter was considered to be too conservative? Now he's out there supporting the destruction of our voting system. This initiative is more than just open primaries. It's about ranked choice voting, which will turn Idaho into Colorado in one election cycle. Now, you know, the people who swallow a camel and strain it in ad, Colorado doesn't have ranked choice voting. Colorado is a beautiful Intermountain West state that nonetheless has become kind of a socialist / budding communist utopia. It was formerly a pretty conservative place, but it's not anymore. That's what she's getting at. It's not just strictly based on ranked choice voting. Alaska saw Lisa Murkowski reelected to Congress because of ranked choice voting. So yes, it favors establishment types. It favors big government types. But that's not something they want to talk about. They want to try to portray this as, well, it's about, you know, everybody having a chance to participate and game the system. That's the part that's left out. Anyway, let's get another point of view on this. Dustin Hurst. Well, of course he did. Of freaking course he did. Butch endorsed Medicaid expansion. Brad Little endorsed largely the socialist money dump into education. Butch endorses reclaim vote rigging scheme. And people wonder why conservatives aren't happy with the establishment. Now, he's got a point here. It's because the establishment is all about power. It's not about proper government. And proper government, I'm sorry, this is a basic civics lesson here. Government doesn't exist to be your sugar daddy that gives you everything you wish for, as long as we can get enough of us together to vote for the right people. It has limits to its power. There are appropriate limitations. And even things that might be desirable. Man, it would be great. You bet if we had pickleball courts in every neighborhood and if every kid had something, you know, to do provided by the government. Why, think how, you know, you're productive and how happy everybody would be. But that's not a proper function of government. And worst, when government starts to do things that the private sector ought to rightly be doing, it can only do it by taking money from the taxpayers, plundering them. That's the term that Frederick Bastiat used in his essay, The Law, which describes why do we have laws in the first place. Bastiat's answer was to ensure that justice prevails. In other words, when someone is harmed, how do we make them whole? How do we hold accountable the person responsible and make sure that justice is the norm? But unfortunately, as he pointed out, people start to think, well, I can use this system of laws and I can use this system of governance to plunder, to take money from people. And yes, I'll promise them all kinds of bells and whistles. Well, we'll put in a skate park here. We're going to put in a ball diamond over there. And we're going to have, you know, subsidized housing. And we're going to do all these things for you. But very few people, at least very few politicians, only a statesman or stateswoman would ask the question, is that a proper function of government? So when you wonder, why do people get their backs up over this whole, you know, open primaries and ranked choice voting initiative? It's because the people who are pushing this initiative are the same people who are pushing for every government program, endless spending, endless taking of tax dollars. They want government without limits because they intend to rule. Plain and simple. The people who are pushing back against this are not trying to consolidate power so it's their turn to rule and they can plunder everybody. They're the ones who are actually trying to keep government within its proper bounds. In other words, to restrict its power to protecting our rights and ensuring that justice prevails, period. Not social justice, justice. Any other kind of justice where you have to add some kind of adjective in front of it is not real justice. So something to think about. Now, this is something, of course, the Times News would do well to get their minds around. Their latest editorial: Idaho's future is up to you, not the private club. This directly relates to the idea of ranked choice voting and open primaries. And boy, they are in full cry on this one. Oh, the hysteria. We live in a country that's been ripped down the middle by politics. There are examples in every state, including our own, of entire issues that have been hijacked by political zealots. Now, of course, they only mean people on the political right who are responding to these issues becoming, political hot potatoes. It wasn't people on the right who introduced these issues. They are responding to the people on the left who forced these issues upon us, forced them into our schools, forced them into our pocketbooks. From abortion to gender, election security to educational curriculum, not even libraries have been spared in an America that seems bent on destroying itself from the inside. Yes, and heaven help the people who are trying to resist that push to remake every institution in some new perverted image. The inflammatory rhetoric from the political fringes, again, they only mean the political right, has made it increasingly difficult, maybe even impossible at times, to be a moderate Republican or Democrat. Well, maybe not that impossible. I mean, look at the candidate in the Boise mayoral race. That's pretty moderate. The middle ground that Ronald Reagan, among other venerable leaders of our country's past, once stood upon has been overgrown by the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Tommy Tuberville. Now, granted, these are some more polarizing figures, but again, it comes down to the major difference that you have to suss out here: who stands for unlimited government and who is standing for limited government and the protection of your inalienable rights. I'll tell you right now, the best way to figure out the ones who are standing for the protection of everybody's freedom, not just their own, are the ones who are being called the extremists. And the ones who are trying to garner as much power as they have because somehow they've got it in their heads. We're the ones who know how to rule, and we're the ones who know what's best. Yeah, nothing extreme about that, even though we're showing your kids how to have all kinds of, weird sex and how to question their gender and a host of other things. Now, the Times News says it will take courage to change the course of the country, not simply from political leaders, but from all of us. Comrades. Oh, I'm sorry. They didn't say comrades, but I think it's implied there. That was the genesis for Idaho Leaders United, whose mission statement is a simple reminder of what it means to stand for something. Idaho Leaders United stands with the vast majority of Idahoans who reject bigotry and political violence and unlimited government, but they didn't put that in there. By the way, the vast majority of Idahoans do reject bigotry and political violence, even if they are standing firm on issues like, yes, right exists and wrong exists. Together, we will defend the great state of Idaho, her future and her legacy for every generation that follows us. Oh, the flowery prose. But it all comes down to, we'll do it by gaining a monopoly on power. Since sprouting to life earlier in the year, Idaho Leaders United has brought together about 600 like-minded Idahoans around its pledge to disavow extremism in any form by any party from all corners of the state, we learned. Yes, 600 like-minded cronies, most of whom have been part of the spoils system, and so they are part of the corruption, and they want to partake in the spoils that are made available by upholding that establishment system. There are people on all sides of the aisle, but the one thing you'll find common, almost none of them have any compunction about expanding government well beyond its legitimate powers. And that is the metric by which you have to measure. What exactly are they trying to accomplish? Do they want unlimited government power? Do they want government to be able to micromanage every aspect of your life? If that's the case, I'm sorry, they're on the wrong side. The people who have to coerce others into doing what they want have never been on the right side of history. Now, that number represents but a fraction of the 90% of people in Idaho who are all on the same page. That's according to Courtney Lydiard, of Ball Ventures in Idaho Falls. It's his hope and that of the group's other founders that Idaho Leaders United can be that place for like-minded Idahoans / cronies to push back against what they call the hard right forces working to overthrow state government. Ooh, we've elevated this to an insurrection, have we? Interesting choice of words on the part of the editorial board from the Times News. Do tell. And to further consolidate power around a select few in the Idaho Republican Party's private club, as Dorothy Moon, the party's chairwoman, has called it. Now, they make it sound like, oh, she's talking about this private club that's there just exclusively to gain power over everybody else. She's referring to the fact that the Republican Party is a private entity. It is not an office of state government. It is not a public commodity. In other words, it's a private entity, just as the Democrat Party is a private entity. And that's why they should have the right to conduct their primary as they see fit. Now, look, I'm not a fan of partisan politics, but I have to reluctantly admit the reason partisan politics, the reason parties exist in the first place is to elect people. It's to organize people and to get people elected to power. But to sit there and claim, well, she says it's part of a private club, please. And the idea that they're trying to overthrow the government. No, they're trying to prevent the government from being overthrown by so-called moderates who are really rhinos or leftists right out in the open, trying to expand government beyond its original designation and definition into something that is in control of every aspect of our lives possible. It's the credo of the statist. Again, anything that's not under government control is considered by definition to be out of control. And when people push back on this, apparently it really upsets, the folks at Idaho Leaders United. We've got to get people participating again in the political process. This was a comment from another person in the editorial who said they pointed to last month's recall election in the West Bonner School District as proof of the power of the people. By voting out two extremists who weren't representing the community's will, West Bonner County did what Lydiard urged the rest of the state to do. Now, if you only get your information from mainstream sources, if the Times News is the primary source, you are lacking a lot of information on this. IdahoTribune.org has done a remarkable job. Casey Whalen has done a terrific job of covering the kind of people that were standing up against those so-called extremists. And I've seen the videos. I have watched hours of videos from West Bonner County School District. The people who were voted out, and yeah, they were legitimately voted out, were not extremists in the least. They didn't conduct themselves like extremists. It's true, they may have had a differing point of view, but the real extremists were the people who were just hooting and shouting them down and hounding them at every turn. They had to keep the office doors locked during certain hours because people were coming in and harassing them, tearing down signs that were opposing the recall. And of course, when they went to reorganize the school board, in other words, now that the two members had been voted off and they needed a new chairman, we went to a judge and we got an injunction, and people were literally jumping on the table, screaming like chimpanzees. These are the responsible adults and responsible citizens who, stood up against the hard right. What exactly does that make them? I mean, if they're not hardcore leftists, they are missing a grand opportunity. But you wouldn't know that, again, if you depend on mainstream sources like KTBB, like the Idaho Statesman, or like the Times News to spoon feed you. Here's what you need to think about this. There are dangerous forces, political forces at work, says the Times News, in the Gem State and beyond. Hate is their weapon, political violence is their answer, and power is their goal. Okay, this is classic psychological projection. Dr. Brian can see this a mile away, and I don't even have a degree in psychology. If you've heard and seen enough of it in Idaho, we have the votes to drive the change. The minority might be louder, but the majority has the final say. And this is exactly what they're trying to drive toward. We want to water down the voting system to where it's just a simple majority. Well, we fooled enough people. Now you have to do what we say you have to do because we got that simple 50% plus one. Idaho is a great place to live, says the Times News. And yeah, it is. Imagine how much better it would be if we could side with the Republican values of a Phil Batt, former governor, over the fearful fantasies of a Dorothy Moon. Look, I remember Phil Batt. I don't think he was a bad person. But I don't know that Phil Batt was really forced to make the kind of stand for principle that Dorothy Moon has had to make. And Idaho Leaders United, let's delve a little bit deeper into this. Tommy Alquist is one of those standout leaders in the group Idaho Leaders United, and appears to have donated to some of the biggest left-wing extremists in Idaho. This is according to Stop Idaho Rhinos on Twitter. McLean is trying to fundamentally change Idaho from Boise on out as well. Now, you'd think his group would be consistent, but they aren't. They only call people on the right extremists, and now we truly know the direction that Tommy wants to take Idaho. In fact, here's a list. This is kind of hard to see, but maybe you can catch a screen grab here of donating to Lauren McLean, to Lawrence Wasden, to Brad Little, to Treg Burnt. These are all wishy-washy, either people on the left or squishy enough Republicans that there's no difference between them and people on the left. So Tommy, you're putting your money where your mouth is, but unfortunately, it's kind of telling on you as far as what you stand for as an individual. Now, Steve Birch, we're going to end on this note. I know we just had 9/11 a couple of days ago, and that was a time of remembrance, and a lot of people thinking back on what happened 22 years ago. Steve Birch, who is reliably on the hard left in Idaho, shared this photo of people. I think it was the Congress standing out there singing "God Bless America" on the steps of the Capitol. Many 9/11 photos are being shared on social media today. This is the one I prefer to recollect, when elected officials set aside partisan rancor and came together in a true bipartisan spirit. Nothing good happens in an us versus them society. And I do kind of remember that with the degree of, there was a time we kind of set aside those differences and everybody was less concerned about, what side of the political aisle are you on, and we really are all Americans. But I think you need a little bit of perspective on this, and thanks to the Idaho Freedom Foundation for pointing this out, or Idaho Freedom Action, rather, for pointing this out. It was a nice moment, wasn't it, when our lawmakers came together on the Capitol steps? Out of that bipartisan spirit came the Patriot Act, endless wars, and now a surveillance state that is being used against the American people. Lovely. And that is the problem. People who do not recognize the powers of government, people who think it should be ever expanding, especially to enhance their own grip on power, that is a threat. And there's no nice way that you can push back against it without having to designate between right and wrong. Oh, that's so extreme. That's so hateful. Why you're threatening political violence? No, I'm just saying no. If they're not used to hearing that word, for some reason, it's considered political violence. But bottom line is, the people who are pushing for endless power, or at least no limits to state power, are the very same people who embraced and enforced and helped along lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and so forth. Something that may still be looming on the horizon as the news media whips up even more of that mind virus trying to scare people. Oh, COVID's on the rise. You should be very afraid. So let me leave you with this thought. The quicker I give all my rights away, the quicker I'll get them all back, said the person who never read one history book in their entire life. I guess the bottom line here is the people who are telling you that, it's such a threat from these people on the political right. I'm asking you, forget about the labels for just a moment and just consider, are they standing for freedom or are they standing for more government? And if the answer is standing for more government, it's a pretty safe bet they're probably on the wrong side of the equation. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.